Some singers write songs. Alan Jackson turned into one. 35 #1 hits. More than 75 million records sold. A voice that became the emotional backdrop for an entire generation of weddings, funerals, and long drives home. But behind that catalog sits a story almost nobody saw coming. A body quietly breaking down for 15 straight years while he kept walking out under the lights anyway. He gave us Chattahoochee and Remember When. He gave a grieving country Where Were You When the World Stopped Turning. Songs that didn't just chart, they became how millions of people remembered their own lives. And behind every one of them was a man who never once let the audience see what it was costing him to stand there and sing it. On June 27, 2026, in Nashville's Nissan Stadium, 80,000 people showed up to say goodbye. And that night, his own daughter said out loud something fans had quietly suspected for years, that the man she thought she understood completely had actually been carrying far more than any of them ever knew. Newnan is a small town about 40 miles outside Atlanta, the kind of place built on churches, front porches, and people who work with their hands because that's what their parents did before them. Alan Eugene Jackson was born there in 1958, the youngest of 5. His father Joseph was a mechanic, a man who said more with a wrench than with words. His mother Ruth held the household together. The family wasn't poor in a dramatic way, just careful with every dollar, the way most working families are. The house Alan grew up in was literally built around his grandfather's old tool shed, not next to it, around it, absorbed right into the walls. He later turned that detail into a song, because that's what he did with everything that shaped him. He sang about it plainly, without decoration, in language anyone who's ever worked with their hands would recognize instantly. There were no piano lessons in his childhood, no music teacher discovering a prodigy. What there was the radio, George Jones, Hank Williams, Merle Haggard, drifting through the house like weather. Alan absorbed those voices the way he absorbed everything about Newnan, without even realizing what it was building inside him. He met Denise Oliphant in high school, and something locked into place that never came undone, no matter what life threw at them later. He was the mechanic's quiet son with a guitar. She was the girl who believed in him before he'd given her any real reason to. They married in December 1979, 21 years old. Almost no money, no industry connections. Just a feeling that Nashville was where you went when music was what you were. Nashville in the early 80s wasn't kind to newcomers. Alan and Denise spent years in that in-between space nobody talks about, too far from home to turn back, not yet close enough to what they wanted to touch it. Denise worked so Alan could write and chase every meeting that paid nothing but kept the door open a crack. That's the real foundation of his story. Not his first hit, but his wife going to work every morning so his dream didn't die for lack of rent money. The break came through a door Denise opened herself. Working the airline counter at Nashville's airport, she recognized country legend Glenn Campbell in line, walked right up, told him about her husband, and asked if he'd listen. Campbell said yes. That single conversation helped crack open the industry that had been keeping Alan out. Not an agent, not a manager, his own wife, willing to walk up to a legend and say, "You need to hear this man sing." By 1989, he had a record deal. By 1990, his first #1, Here in the Real World. Through the 90s, he became one of the architects of the neo-traditional country movement alongside George Strait, artists who pulled the genre back toward its roots just as Nashville was drifting toward pop gloss. He wrote songs that sounded simple and weren't, the hardest trick in any art form. When the September 11th attacks shook the country in 2001, it was Alan Jackson who wrote the song that outlasted the moment. He wrote, "Where Were You?" in a single night, performed it 41 days later at the CMA Awards, and reduced a room full of industry professionals to tears. Not because it made a political statement, because it was simply achingly human. But behind those 35 #1 hits, a marriage was being tested in ways the public never saw. In 1997, Alan admitted to infidelity. No excuses, no spin. Denise didn't just absorb it quietly. She wrote her own book about surviving it and rebuilding their faith together. They separated briefly. Then they came back. 46 years of marriage by 2026, not a perfect one, a real one. In 2010, a new crisis. Denise was diagnosed with colorectal cancer. She recovered, and Alan was there, the way he'd always been. From the airport counter to the final concert stage, the woman who opened the door that changed everything never once left the room. In 2011, Alan received a diagnosis he told almost no one about for a full decade. Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, a hereditary nerve disorder, inherited, ironically, from the same father whose tool shed built the house he grew up in. It progressively damages the nerves controlling movement in the arms and legs. There's no cure, only management. For 10 years, he toured, recorded, and performed at the height of his powers while quietly managing a body that was slipping away underneath him. He finally spoke about it in September 2021, telling NBC's Jenna Bush Hager plainly, "I have this neuropathy. It's genetic. I inherited it from my daddy. It's getting more and more obvious, and I know I'm stumbling around on stage." For a decade, every performance fans had watched was a man compensating in real time for something they couldn't see. Not performing despite the disease, but performing through it. By March 2025, at the Grand Ole Opry, the progression was visible to longtime fans in a way it hadn't been before. Then, in May 2025, in Milwaukee, came a quiet milestone. His last regular tour date, performed entirely seated. The first time in over 40 years of touring, he couldn't stand for a full show. His voice never wavered. The audience stood for him anyway. June 27th, 2026. Last call, one more for the road. 80,000 people packed Nissan Stadium in Nashville, with millions more watching the stream. $1 from every ticket went to the CMT Research Foundation. Over $2 million raised in a single night, turning his own 15-year private battle into funding for the people who'll inherit the same disease after him. His eldest daughter, Mattie, had been to more of his shows than she could count. 36 years of concerts that felt like background noise, not history. That night, standing among 80,000 strangers who'd never met her father but loved him anyway, something shifted. She wrote afterward that he had outperformed her expectations, that it was surreal and humbling to watch him give everything he had left. Even the daughter who'd seen it all had been underestimating him. Away from the stage, Alan became a grandfather 5 times over in the very years the disease was taking the most from him. 3 daughters, 3 pregnancies in the same year. A Christmas photo in 2025 that stopped the internet. A family expanding right alongside a body that was quietly contracting. He never asked anyone to adjust their expectations for what it cost him to be there. He simply adapted, sitting when he could no longer stand, finding a new way to give the same thing rather than surrendering it. That's not a man stumbling around on stage. That's grace, hard-earned, in plain sight the whole time. What Alan Jackson built over nearly 7 decades isn't just a catalog, it's proof. Proof that a boy from a tool shed house with nothing but a guitar and a wife who believed in him can change the sound of American music. Proof that a marriage can crack and come back stronger. Proof that a man can carry a disease for 15 years and still give people everything he has left. When asked in 2023 if there'd be another album, Alan didn't hedge. He simply said, "Yes, I would hope so." 3 words that meant more coming from a man who knew exactly what singing cost him by then, and was saying, without any self-pity, that the cost still hadn't outweighed what it was worth. If Alan Jackson's voice ever carried you through something you couldn't carry alone, tell us the song and the moment in the comments below. And if stories like this one, about what it really costs to be the person the world thinks it knows, matter to you, subscribe. There's always more truth behind the legend than the highlight reel ever shows.